As many of you know, we are in the midst of creating a new Center for Digital Studies / Humanities. We're still working out the title there. And very pleased today to introduce Kimon Keramidas, who's been grilled all day by many of us, and so he's going to give us a little talk about the direction of digital studies and his thoughts about it, and what a Center for Digital Studies would look like on our campus. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to
Hello, everybody. So this is irritating. So I'm going to just talk about some ideas I have today. I can give you a little bit of background of how I got to here. I have a PhD in theater history, and I have a background as a seating designer. So my kind of move to academia came through practical theater. But while I was getting my PhD at the City University of New York, I started doing a program that was about interactive technology and pedagogy. And what it was to try to address problems in graduate education, which may not be super relevant, but that most people who get their PhDs aren't really taught how to teach the students that they'll end up teaching most of their careers. And even more so, there wasn't really a great program that addressed how technology influences those kind of teaching practices. And this program tried to solve that problem. And it ended up really changing my path of understanding what the academy was about, and connected a lot of my geekier and more playful sides of digital technology to the intellectual and teaching questions that I had moving forward with my career. From that work and finishing my PhD, I was able to get a position at the Bard Graduate Center, which is a small research institute on the Upper West Side of New York City. We're super small. We have 60 students and 15 faculty, but there I'm able to work very closely with the entire community, thinking about how these digital technologies embed in all our sense of practice there. You know, we have publications, we have student work, we have faculty research projects, and we actually have exhibitions in the gallery space, much like you guys have here. And that's been an interesting time for me to figure out more concretely how I feel about the digital in the academy, because we're at a time where a lot of people are talking with a lot of enthusiasm and glowing opinions and kind of very specific rhetoric about how they feel digital technology should fit in the day-to-day of being a student or being a professor or being a researcher. And it's a contested space right now. And it's great to hear that Rutgers-Camen really wants to initiate a strong push towards finding a center that will guide that kind of work. And a fabulous director to guide that center. So these are some of my ideas that have kind of been crafted over almost a decade of practice in doing this kind of programmatic development now. And I think that it's clear, hopefully it's coherent. I think that I try to speak to as many people in the constituent population as possible. I think that these are inevitable things that we're all dealing with. And it's about time the academy figures out the best way to serve different student and faculty populations in dealing with it. So I'll give it a go. And you know, I'm going to go through this, and I'm not a huge fan of lectures, but you have to do these. And so I'm really looking forward to conversation. So please make sure you store up a bunch of really great questions, and we can have a really great discussion afterwards. So, why is the digital important, right? We know it's important. You know, it's everywhere. The past 30 years have been, you know, one of the most profound periods of change in the history of mankind. There are statistics that we've created something like 4 times as much like consumable culture in the last 30 years as all of human history before that. And so these new technologies are clearly creating an era of significance. And because the academy always wants to respond to those eras of significance, because we are amidst them and we study them, there are probably reasons why the digital is important. So the first one is the utter ubiquity of these systems. You know, if I had taught this, if I had given this lecture or taught a course 15 years ago when I was an undergrad, the question of ubiquity was still, maybe still around a possibility of maybe that everything wasn't ubiquitous. Facebook didn't exist, Google didn't exist. But now these all exist, and we all carry a smartphone in our pockets. I don't think I put mine on vibrate yet, so I'm a little paranoid that's going to go off in the middle of the talk. And so we've gotten to a point, despite some protests from more resistant parts of the academy, that these are tools that are ubiquitous. They are everywhere, and the transitions into using them as part of our work are really inevitable. So the real question is, how do you set yourself up to adapt to those situations? That gets me to fluency. One of the conversations that I've been part of and that I've taught about are questions of digital literacy or digital fluency. And what this means is that in an era of ubiquity, we have to figure out the best way to be educated in how to deal with these new systems. So when we think of literacy, which is a term often thrown around, what I think of, and I've told this story to the faculty a couple times today, is when I did my language exams for my PhD. I had to do my Spanish and I had to do my German. If you asked me to do anything with those two languages at this point, it'd be completely impossible, except for my ability to tell my Latin soccer player friends where to go on a soccer field. That's kind of how literacy is measured. It's the ability to read something and to be able to understand it, but then not really to engage it in a really critical way. Fluency is the ability to not only understand the language or a complex system, but then be able to take hold of it, do something creative with it, and understand the deep underpinnings of it. And in a digital era where we're so inundated with all these digital media, and we're dealing with a lot of corporations with a lot of power over these different interfaces, such as Facebook and Google and Apple and Microsoft, it's important to establish digital fluency so that when you as students or you as faculty go out and use a tool, you understand the place of that tool in your life. You understand who created that tool, why the visual signals you're being sent are doing such an important task. Who does Twitter go out to? You know, what does it mean to like something on Facebook? What does it mean to search something on Google? These seem like simple things, but ultimately there are large and complex systems behind them. And as we have to deal with them in a daily life, we have to make sure that we're critiquing those and then empowering everyone to really take hold of the digital media and be able to creatively and constructively critique and manage them. The last part, and this is the great part about being an academic and working with students, is really harnessing the possibility of these digital. One of the things I say when I work with people is that the first thing we do is to, no matter what our kind of project is we want to ask an intellectual question. It's devoid of any type of media or any kind of tool. We want to know what the intellectual question is. And then we'll go about using different sets of tools for our answers. We have methodologies, we have visualization programs. We can use different tools to answer that question. Then what almost always happens is that the tools start unpacking things that we had never thought were possible before. They provide a whole new layer of possibility. If you wrote a book in the past, well, what does it mean to write an ebook? What does it mean to put all your information on a website? What does it mean, rather than reading a book to do analysis, to do a distant text analysis where you're studying the patterns of reading? What does it mean for you to be able to create a digital exhibition rather than just going to a museum? The digital media are so flexible and so empowering and increasingly low cost that there is so much more possibility than there were before in the past. And that ends up feeding back and allowing us to ask new questions that we couldn't have imagined. So there's a great cycle of wanting to ask an important question and looking for an answer. And then in the process of looking for that answer, expanding out to the possibilities of new questions and new opportunities. That's something that digital provides us with. So if we know the digital is important, how do we situate the digital? How do we put it into an academic curriculum, and how do we make it an important part of everyday life for the constituents on our campus? So the first one is, as is wisely being done, you build a center. Why do you build a center? Center's important because they give a place, they give a location. As humans, we're social beings. And as social beings, we don't necessarily just want spaces, we also want places. And the difference between a space and the place is that there's some kind of emotional or historical connection to that space. And in a time of transition where people can either feel alienated or isolated or undereducated, it's good to not just provide a suite of opportunities, but to give a place for those opportunities to be located within, and to really ground those things. I like to call it a center of gravity. It's like we have a solar system, and all the different members of the community are swirling around the sun, and the sun kind of gives us a place of gravity to think about these things. And the digital center can provide a really great resource for answering questions, for allowing collaborative space, for providing technologies, and for providing the hubs of the types of projects that are really important in this age. What's the next thing you do? You build a program. And why do you build a program? Because as the center creates a physical place and human resources, a program can really give kind of an ideological and philosophical guidance towards how to approach the digital. one of the things that has happened is that the digital has ascended so quickly in our life, and in a way like no other media before, is that we really are dealing with things before they're conceptualized and understood. And then they often come and go before they're really well grasped. I mean, we never really had a conversation about social networking when MySpace came up, because it kind of came up and then it went away, or even before that, Friendster, if anyone remembers it. So what we want to do is establish a pattern of intellectual endeavor that grounds our critique, that essentially allows us to look at new things and have a foundation for breaking them apart and then figuring out how we feel about them and how we will ask questions and provide answers about those objects. And you need a strong curriculum. You need a program of study that provides that information. I guess there's ideas of a certificate program here that is very clear in understanding that there's a historical part of this, there's a theoretical part of this, and there's also a practical part of this. And that kind of foundation will allow you to understand what the tool is, how the tool is connected to other histories of things, and then how was that tool created in a certain way. The program provides an analytical and critical perspective for that type of critique. The last thing is using the center and the program to establish a university-wide or college-wide culture. The culture is really important here, because what you want is the understanding that A, these technologies are everywhere and that the university is supporting them. And also B, to make sure that all of the students, all of the faculty feel involved in that project. One of the things that's been happening at some universities is that a dean or a couple of faculty think the digital is a really great idea. They get a chunk of money, they find a building, and off in the corner, there's the digital center. But those centers don't necessarily reach out to every corner of the institution. They tend to do isolated work, and they tend to create projects that can gather a lot of renown, but don't reach to the 800 student lecture class at a big university. And really, that's a shortfall of understanding the pivotalness of these type of technologies across an entire institution. So, you know, understanding the digital and the power of center starts with your courseware Sakai, you know? Like, how does that influence all your classes and logging in and getting your grades? It also influences an advanced faculty research project that's doing massive visualizations of kind of social structures across history. And they may be different in scale, but they should share a cultural connection in an institution. And the center and the curriculum create that foundation through which everyone can feel involved. And then once the whole culture is adapted, we can realize how these aren't very different from our daily life. That the things that we do in the digital every day for our regular communication just become part of our scholarship. And that really is understanding the shift that we're making towards the digital. So how do you do these things? I reflected on the place I currently work at in a piece for a journal I started. And I wanted to talk about the different progress we had gone through for establishing what we found was a very institution-wide adoption of digital practice. And I started thinking of what had we done that made sense. And I came up with a term called humane cyber infrastructure. Let me unpack that for you a little bit. So, in recent, I guess, 2003, seems like ancient history now, but a good historian will say that's pretty recent, workshop on cyber infrastructures, we have this definition. It's the coordinated aggregate of software, hardware, and other technologies, as well as human expertise required to support current and future discoveries in science and engineering. So, if you don't worry about science and engineering, you can put any part of the discipline in that. This is kind of a really interesting thought to have. So cyber infrastructure is not just a bunch of wires and a router in the background. You know, it's not just a Mac on a computer. It's not just Microsoft Office. But more importantly, it's the connection of all those things with the humans who both use and know about those technologies. And that's a really great holistic way of thinking of the connectedness of such things. And if you kind of explode that concept out, you can really tie everyone in the institution into that. You know, all the people who are using technologies could be considered experts. And so how do we build a system that addresses all of those? The next one is humane. So Jeff Raskin was one of the early designers of the first Macintosh computer, right? And the Macintosh essentially changed the way we think of computing, went from a very text-based command line interface to the graphical user interface that we know from everywhere now. So he had this to say, and this is from a book where he's describing how to move the next step forward of computer interface design. He says, if a system's one-on-one interaction with its human user is not pleasant and facile, the resulting deficiency will poison the performance of the entire system. However fine that system might be in other aspects, an interface is humane if it is responsive to human needs and considerate of human frailties. I don't know why I found to put these two things together, but they made a lot of sense to me. Because what we want to do is build systems that encourage and enhance digital process. But what we really want to do is make it easy for the people using them. We want those things to be humane. And as I read this, I was like, if you mess up one thing, you can poison the whole system. And most of messing up is when you aren't paying attention to the needs of the people using things. And for that reason, I feel very strongly that a lot of the work that a center does is making people feel comfortable with technology at whatever level they are, and really engaging and enabling them to be much more experimental, innovative, and explorative with these technologies. And it's about creating a situation where human frailties are considered, human needs are considered, and that the system is not poisoning those people. It's the people that matter, not the technology. You know, education and intellectual conversation is all about discourse. And discourse requires people to talk to one another. So if we don't have that kind of conversation going on, the technologies aren't suited for people in a humane way, then they aren't succeeding. So how do we do this? Well, you need hardware. You can't do digital stuff without hardware. Hardware is the foundation for software, which is going to do a lot of the heavy lifting, but you need stuff. So what do we need? We need computers. We need desktops, we need laptops, we need mobile. We need this stuff. It's inevitable. And it costs a lot of money sometimes, but there are ways of doing it in a right way that are human friendly. In my lab right now, we have mostly Macs. Why do we have mostly Macs? Because I'm completely and utterly biased. But for another reason, Macintosh computers are the only computers that can easily run Windows, Linux, and Mac. So even though it seems like you're making a choice, what it does is it provides options. It provides all the options that are out there. It responds to any human person's need. I can set up boot camp and I got Windows set up. I can set up a Parallels installation and I can have Linux running on my computers. We also have a couple of PCs in case people need the dedicated power of that. So that's the kind of consideration of gathering the right hardware and computers that let people do things. That the cyber infrastructure is flexible enough that it responds to the needs of people. What else do we need? We need cool peripherals. So we got cameras, tablets, 3D mice. And what these are is these are the extensions of the traditional hardware of the computers. And these allow us to capture information in a much more diverse range. It allows us really kind of alternative control patterns. So this 3D mouse that we have, which is the thing on the bottom, it makes it so much easier to travel through Google Earth. So rather than kind of clicking through arrows, you're actually flying through Google Earth like a helicopter. And it makes it feel more comfortable. You know, it reduces the barrier of entry. It makes that tool a lot easier to use. So these are relatively simple things, but they're important to think of kind of in a little ecosystem. You know, the thing I really feel about hardware is that it needs to be really robust and powerful. You can't have people going in and working on a computer that doesn't work because there's no way they're going to be creative. They're spending all their time booting the thing up and rebooting it, trying to load software. If you have good, strong, powerful computing, people sit down, they open the software, they get to work, and they can be creative. And that's what we're really looking for. The last thing is think more out of the box. So this, does anyone know what that is? It's a little small. That's a 3D printer. Oh, that's good. So I'm lucky where I am right now because we're an institute that studies material culture, right? We study stuff. Well, what's digital stuff, right? Well, hardware is clearly digital stuff, but that's the functional means to an end. But what if the digital end is material? You know, we're really at a really fascinating, crucial point where we're getting to start to think about fabrication. And when you start thinking about fabrication, it makes you realize the ubiquity of the digital all over again. That these digital technologies are tied into everything we wear, everything we use, everything we touch, everything we drive. And we're getting to a point where using digital technology to make those things is much more accessible. So that's another place where once we get to a place of interest with these technologies, we can push out, we can find more cutting edge technologies. And then when you get to the point where, well, I was 3D rendering things in a CAD program, well, now I want to print that out. And then I want to see what different colors and different textures will do. And then it kind of makes me wonder, well, what about intellectual property rights? Do I own the thing? Like, who owns a property thing? There's been great experiments that we're actually get to be part of. I'm right now setting up something where the Met is scanning objects and printing them out and thinking about what it's like to print out their collection. And we're scheduling a meeting where we're going to go scan a knight in armor from the Arms and Armor collection and maybe print it out on our 3D printer. So there's no telling what direction we're going to go with these. This tool is only $2,000 too. Like 10 years ago, it would have been $40,000, $50,000, $60,000. So this is something that you can buy and have in your own apartment if you want to commit the money. And it's definitely something we can experiment with. So there's a lot of range in hardware that allows you to really push out and figure out new boundaries for experience. Then lastly, there's that. This is really super important, and this is the hardware of the network. And this is making sure that the materials you're working with are connected and that you can reach out to the world. This seems like a software question, but it's actually a hardware question. And it's really making sure that we understand how all this information travels around the now universe, and how bit A gets to point B. It's a hardware question, and it's something that really makes it important for people using a lot of technology on the campus. You can't do good research without good servers and networks and without good bandwidth. And that requires a lot of investment. And it ultimately is the real, because everything is so much on the cloud, it is really the foundation of a lot of the powerful work we can do. So what do we do with software? Software comes in a lot of different ranges. So the first set of stuff we have are things like these tools. We have iLife, Microsoft Office, Prezi, FileMaker, Zotero. These are all either low cost or cheap tools. And this is the first most important part about starting to work with digital software, especially with people who feel uncomfortable. You want to find software that has a low barrier of entry and a shallow learning curve. What that allows people to do is start working at a place where they can begin with the tool at a very quick pace, and then become proficient in a relatively short time frame. Because once you get to that point of proficiency is where you can start mastering and doing experimental stuff with the tool. We have wikis that we use at my current institution. And it quickly went from a place where they were there to distribute PDFs to faculty and students experimenting with tracking their master's research or creating new innovative ways of having conversations online. And one of the reasons it worked is I picked a tool that was really easy. And so I do this a lot with a lot of people. You know, Microsoft Office, you don't realize it's a digital technology. It's almost transparent at this point. And it's a tool that we've used so much that we can do a lot more creative things with it. iLife, it allows for nonlinear video editing, audio transformation, and GarageBand has essentially made anyone a musician in their house now in a very fascinating way. So these are the first stage tools. Then you get a second stage of tools. Things like the Adobe Creative Suite, Google SketchUp, Google Earth, Final Cut Pro. Now we're getting to more complex systems. But if you started in the easy system, your threshold is a lot less. And you can start pushing the challenges even farther. Final Cut Pro, professional movies are cut on Final Cut Pro now. And you can get that for a few $100s. Google Earth, you can do phenomenal modeling and phenomenal flying in. We're using it for all sorts of things right now. And students are mapping and using KML files and spreadsheets and integrating things. And Google Earth is a jump one step up from Google Maps, which most of us use to get anywhere on the planet. And Adobe Creative Suite, while in some ways massive and overwhelming, is structured in a way that is familiar enough that people can do really creative things and then ascend to being high-level designers. Like Alan in the back here, I'm sure is familiar with the suite. So, what do we have after that? We have platforms like WordPress, Drupal, Wikidot, and Omeka. These are online content management systems. And they may be a little more structured in what they let us do. I know if people have used WordPress blogs before, you've probably seen that. But what is great about them is that they automatically get us online. They automatically allow us to share a lot of information. And that's a really vital part of the digital, is that this stuff can go anywhere, it can go there quickly, and it can go there with a lot of control. So these platforms are really crucial to starting understanding of, if you're mastering technologies, how do you master the dissemination? And then how do you build for audiences? Then, once we get really forward, you start getting the heavy-duty stuff. So ArcGIS is like Google Earth on super steroids. You can do really high-end management of geographical information. Gephi is a really powerful visualization tool where you can take huge data sets and make network maps of them. Voyant is a way to do high-end analysis of massive bodies of text. And AutoCAD is what they design cars with to give it the scale. So this is the kind of last stage of application-based work. You know, and if we have these kinds of tools, if we get to this point, we're doing really well. Because you're able to delve into content in a very deep way and discover things that you wouldn't have seen before. And they're wrapped in algorithmic and visual patterns that really unlock the potential of the digital. And then finally, there's these suckers. And if you can do this, you can build your own application. And that's where you get to a real power. So you can build mobile apps. You can build software customized for your project. And when you're understanding the level of these kinds of languages like C++, Ruby, and Python, you are really fluent. Because not only are you understanding how a system works from a user base, but you're understanding how a system works from the creator's end. And that can unpack a powerful set of tools. I think one of the best things I've had is, on my own, I've taught myself HTML, CSS, PHP, just because I'm in it all the time. And I can now look at a website and unpack how it was put together. And really, I understand the design principles, the routing principles of how network and content management systems like the ones on the right work. And when you're empowered with that, you have a better understanding of what people have done in the past and how you can really grasp that information and move forward and make your own new innovations. So we have this stuff. How do we put the human in the humane? Right? The first two sets, the hardware and software, that's just buying a lot of stuff. And we got to put it on computers and it sits there. But what we really need is to make sure that it's well managed, it's well guided, and that people feel comfortable using it. So the first way that we put the human in humane, we encourage collaboration. Digital projects are adding so many layers of complexity to the work that we're used to doing that you need two things. First of all, you almost always need some kind of intellectual collaboration. You find a lot of projects that are pulling from interdisciplinary conversations. We had a project that we did that was a history of 19th century New York and material culture, and then we had like digital image analysis, and you're going to end up working with a bunch of different people. So for that class, we had our head of new media research, and then we had 2 different people from the New York Public Library guiding us through the archives and the resources, and then myself kind of guiding the web development. That's for one project for 10 students. That's a really collaborative process, and you gain a lot of that because there's a lot of voices in the room. It's humane because people are attended to, and there's an understanding of making sure all the little nooks and crannies of the conversation are covered. The next is, out of that comes a breadth of disciplinary coverage. This is particularly relevant to the building of the center in the program here, is that what we want to do is make sure that we realize that these questions aren't isolated to the humanities, they aren't isolated to the social sciences, they're not isolated to any portion of any kind of institution. They're very similar questions that are getting asked all across the realm. And what we want to make sure we do is provide answers to all those people. Because often the answers are very similar. We're not going to have to reinvent the wheel every time. And we might even find is that people in humanities are looking for answers which the sciences have already found, and vice versa. The sciences that are, for good reason, often very far ahead in technological work. And that is something that a lot of people in the humanities are looking to solve. Those tools like Gephi and Voyant are based on kind of algorithmic analysis that have come out of social science and science analysis. So we want to make sure there's a breadth of disciplinary coverage. We also want to make sure that students are empowered. Because there's kind of 2 flows that go on in the development of any kind of digital culture. There's the most obvious one. The dean says we need this, and the faculty says we want this. But there's also the grassroots of the student who are saying, this is part of our life, I want it to be part of my education, and I want to be good at it, and I want to learn about it. So there's a couple of ways we do this. I mean, there's classes, obviously, but through active practice, we can do one thing. We can have students as ambassadors and teachers. And I think a great idea if we're going to establish a center like this is to have some students who are more capable act as ambassadors to other classes, to help professors develop websites for their courses, to guide student projects through work. We have this project at CUNY. They're called IT Fellows, and they're advanced PhD students who have experience in technology, and they go out to all the professors who are out in CUNY, and they help them set up their courses. And that's a great way to involve the students in the academic life of the institution and empower them to use the tools. And then what happens is this, hopefully, is that they become grassroots organizers. My institution, the students, they just wanted to start a digital group together. It's called Tangible Technologies. It wasn't even my idea. And now they meet once every 2 weeks. There's about 7 of them, which is it's more than the 10th of our population. And they get together and they talk about these things. And if the students start pushing, if the institution is right, and I feel like this institution has that, it'll respond. It'll respond to those needs. And then you'll have many voices. You'll have the traditional academic faculty voices, you'll have the powerful administrative voices, and you'll have the really strong grassroots organization from the students. And then that's really humane, because the students feel invested in building a curriculum, not that they're just getting pushed down a certain kind of program. Another important thing in this is to showcase work. You want to show off the stuff that people are doing. This does a few things. First of all, it generates pride and plaudits. It makes sure that people understand the quality of the work that's being done across an institution. If we can show off a bunch of projects that are done in the class, those students are more eager to show their work in public, and they're really enthusiastic about sharing their work with their students. And then they get feedback. They get a great job, that looks awesome. But the most important thing is it spurs more people to do those things. People become excited about that. They see these really great projects and go, how did you do that? How can I work on that? I do salons every semester at my institution. I pick 2 or 3 of the best projects. We have about an hour and a half. We invite whoever wants to come to the community, and we just show it off. The students do the presentations, they talk about their projects, and it's been the best way for me to get the message of the Digital Media Lab at my institution across to the whole faculty and the students. This wikis that we use for coursework, they came out of the fact that 2 or 3 times we shared the same wiki over and over again. And pretty soon all the faculty were like, hey, can I have one of those? And rather than saying everyone will have a course site, one semester just everyone did. So that's the kind of grassroots and building that you want to look for. You don't want to do decrees or demands. People love resisting decrees and demands. You want to build a culture where people feel they're participating and that it's a humane situation for them to respond to, and that their frailties are attended to, their anxieties, their fears about doing these types of projects. And lastly, focus on providing service. I've been saying this today during our meetings. I see this type of work as a service industry. The technology is there and it's useful. And people can find it on their own if they need to. I found most of this stuff on my own. But not everyone can find it. And sometimes they need their handheld to be brought to it. And then when they get to that technology, sometimes they need to be taught how to use it. And there's no shame in sitting down and going over the same thing multiple times. And if people feel that there's a kind of system that enables them to go back multiple times and not to be made feel stupid, and faculty in particular always like to feel they're the smartest people in the room, it's a much more beneficial situation for everyone. It means that there's a lot of traffic in the center. It means that people are coming in for all sorts of different types of advice. And it means that in the end, people are being tended to, and they feel comfortable, and they feel like they can take risks. And we want people taking risks. We want people being creative. So if we are lucky enough to create a humane cyber infrastructure, how do we craft a program of study? Well, first of all, we have to think of the digital as a field on its own specificity. What that means is that a lot of what we want to do is put the digital in context. It's not a big deal, it's a subtle shift, we have to adapt to it, it's inevitable, but really it's also its own new beast. We can't deny that. So Janet Murray, who wrote a great book called Hamlet on the Holodeck, and then wrote this book called Inventing the Medium, says this, that all things made with electronic bits and computer codes belong to a single new medium, the digital medium, with its own unique affordances. So affordances is kind of a design term, and what that means is when you create an interface of some sort, it has affordances, what it allows you to do, and it has constraints, what it doesn't allow you to do. And so that's where that term comes from. And it's important to think of that because the digital medium is providing us with a range of affordances as far as a communicative platform that we've never really seen before in history. And what it's done is, through the bits and computer code, it's ingested all the previous media. So what she's saying is that an ebook, a film, a video game, they're all the same thing. They're just numbers. And while we need to understand genre, and we need to understand the separation, we also have to understand how that specific nature of the digital is very important. And that can be the core for us understanding its cultural impact, its implications for creative design, all sorts of different layers about why the digital is important, its situation relative to other media in the past, how it is immaterial and how it isn't material compared to film and music and all these different tools. So that's the first really important foundation in creating a program, that the digital, it is specific. But digital technologies are also a part of the historical narrative. There's a great book called Remediation by 2 media theorists, and what they point out is that if you look at the early stages of any medium, it never comes fully formed. So if you think about film, the first films by Thomas Edison, he was recording performers from across the river in New York City. He recorded vaudeville performers and dancers. So what's he doing? He's remediating live performance. There is no film yet because right now film is just a technology. It's not really an art form. And this happens through most of the early history of film. Even going into the early Hitchcock films. It's like a box set, which is like the set you guys have in your theater right now, and he's moving a camera around it. It's not until you get to people like Scorsese and Spielberg and Francis Ford Coppola and George Lucas who all grew up watching those old types of films, and who all happened to go to school together actually, which was interesting, that they came together and started creating film-specific genres. I mean, if you look at Apocalypse Now, it doesn't look like theater. If you look at Star Wars, it doesn't look like theater. Star Wars actually looks like older films. You know, it's actually starting to build on a filmic history. So we want to think about how digital technologies are doing the same thing, and how they're part of the historical narrative. So really, what the digital shift can be related to is the printing shift with the Gutenberg press. You know, with the change from this cuneiform and rocks to papyrus pages. Like, how are these media changes influencing social change and cultural change? And how are those transitions important? And how can we place the digital as part of the historical narrative? And finally, how is digital a fascinating interdisciplinary crossroads? Because of that ubiquity I talked about before, it touches everything. You know, it touches daily life, it touches academic life, and that means we can use the digital program as a place to pull together media studies, with legal studies, with fine art, with sociology, with the sciences. And we can create all sorts of interesting mixes of co-taught classes, of certificates that have a wide-branching situation, and to understand where these digital tools are situated in other fields of study. So finally, or the one last kind of thing, is talking about the relationship between the program and the center and vice versa. The program provides context for the center. So that we can have a historical justification for why we have this room with the stuff in it. You know, it lets us figure out what are the best ways to connect it to the curriculum and really make sure that that physical space/place is connected to an ideological and intellectual endeavor. Also, the program can allow it to continue critique of the space. We don't want to just put the technology in there and start going willy-nilly without constantly being aware of thinking about what we've done in that space and why it is important, why it is constructed in a certain way, and who are the kind of intellectual and even corporate players that are involved in our process. When I'm using Google Earth, I'm using Google Earth, right? So what does that mean? When I do a Google search, I'm doing a Google search. We want to make sure that we have lively critique of these tools as we go forward using them. Vice versa, the center provides context for the program, right? The center justifies the need for the curriculum. You know, it's clear, especially if we have high traffic in the center, that we need to have a program of study to study what goes on in the center. So that provides a different type of context. And then another C, a little alliteration there, sorry for being cutesy, is competency. The center, we can do the critique from an intellectual standpoint, but having the resources and being able to study the materials that we're doing, we need competency. We need to be able to go somewhere and do the things so that we can be better at understanding them. That's all of the role of having workshops and having training sessions, and that goes back to the service question. So as I leave, and I've been doing all this kind of triumphantalism, I want to say why should we also be wary of the digital? And particularly, why should we be wary of the digital at this particular moment? I'm not as wary actually after my conversations today. I think the students should know that your faculty really have impressed me with the direction that these kinds of questions are going in. But there are a lot of places that are not addressing some important things. So first of all, a lot of people are dealing with the digital and they're dealing with a lack of historicity. They're thinking of it as a new revolution, as this massive quantum change in our lifestyle. So it's undeniable that it is having a huge impact. But at the same time, we want to kind of tap the revolutionary commentary down. Because what it tends to do is it tends to remove us from the context of history. It tends to isolate it as this kind of new, transcendent, kind of almost cultish phenomenon. And that's not what it is. It's just part of social progress. It's part of technological development. And it's part of the feedback between people and technologies. People create technologies and then technologies change culture. That's just the system of functioning. And this is one of the eras of that. There will be another technology someday. There might be biological storage systems. They're finding out that mitochondria have storage potential, you know, all sorts of crazy stuff in the sci-fi land. At that point, we want to be ready for the why be wary of the biological. So we want to make sure that we keep the historicity of the digital in check. We also want to make sure that we don't alienate any of the uninitiated. The move towards rapid adoption of these things, what it tends to do is, I'll tell a story. I literally had someone, we are trying to organize digital humanities people in New York City together where I am right now. I literally had someone say, if you aren't doing X, Y, and Z types of project of certain complexity, well, you're not doing digital humanities and you just missed the bus. Well, that's really not a very humane strategy. You know, the idea is that the uninitiated are the people who need the most help. We need to introduce them in a way that is unthreatening. And we don't want to alienate them, because what happens is once you get alienation, you get community bifurcation. And then that causes tension and unnecessary conflict. And this is a very big challenge, and what we want to do is establish a culture where everyone feels like they're part of that. And then finally, you get a lot of unnecessary politicization. One of the things I'm wary of is using the digital as a call for massive changes in the academy. There are a lot of things that are broken with American education right now. There are huge universities that are teaching 1,000-person courses, and people aren't getting the really close student-to-professor instruction. There are questions about whether the peer-reviewed journal system is utterly broken. There's a question about whether tenure is something that is viable anymore. People say that the digital can solve all of that, but those are really people issues. Those are really human issues. Those are things that need to be solved, possibly through technology, but by people initiating conversations about those situations. And I feel that when you over-politicize the digital and the kinds of questions we're asking, you can drag people out of the conversations that need to happen because they're distracted by the conversations that are kind of tainting the waters. And if you overemphasize, like, the digital is going to fix peer review, and we're going to be better scholars for that, and none of the students care about that, you know? And then if that's the main impetus of an institution focusing on the digital, then we're really losing our way. So it's about a broad approach and making sure that people are comfortable and tapping down the political comments. Thank you. Any questions?
Hi. You probably been asked this several times today, but I wasn't there, so
that's fine,
I
that's
have
fine.
to ask you something you probably answered. How concretely do you see yourself interacting with departments on campus? From the history department, I'm wondering how the center would work with us.
I mean, my idea is that it's about ambassadors, and one thing that a lot of digital centers do is they sit and wait, and a lot of people are afraid. They're afraid to get up and go over, and so one thing I would do when we were talking about, I mean, this is the issues of staffing, like, you know, finding ways for people to go out and meet with faculty and student in conjunction, to have those conversations, to find those people who are ready to go right now, to find ways to enable the understanding of the platforms that are already pre-existent. And you guys use Sakai, I think, as your learning management system, but there's also a WordPress presence. Like, how do you take those tools that you've already embedded and are part of the culture and enhance their usability? Those are service conversations, you know, once again, and good service means you go out and you have those conversations, and I would see that as an important part. I don't know the logistics of it. That's a hard thing to answer completely because, like, sometimes it takes an army, but hopefully we'd also build an army over a small time. And that's also where it's also important to build up a relationship with the students so they can almost be couriers of how programs are functioning.
I'm Julie Still. Oh, sorry.
No, I was saying Julie.
Oh, okay. I'm Julie Still from the libraries, and I did get the purple medal.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered, could you say a few words about what your feelings on archiving and metadata and repositories, or are you tired of this concept?
No, I'm not tired of it. I just said that because we're doing this stuff at my institution right now. The word archive has become, it's a weird word too, it's like it's misused. So one of the biggest problems, going back to that, we're creating so much more culture than we ever have before, is like, what do you save?
Yeah.
Why do you save it? And how do you save it? And then how do you organize it? One of the things I really feel big about is that we should start saving more actively student work and documenting the digital student work people do. What happens to a lot of professors is they do their own kind, if they're being experimental, they kind of do their own thing and they get students to buy domains, and then you go to look at that project 2 semesters later and it's gone. And then it's hard to track how those professors have adapted, even for them. So I think that a large part of the center working well too, and I did make it, is working well with the library. As I've done more of this, and as I've kind of had to teach myself about libraries, it makes you realize that information science has been doing this stuff for decades, and no one gives them any credit. And the service is there too. You know, libraries are also based on service. So what I think is important is to work with librarians in that history to figure out what stuff we want to save. What's important for creating an institutional repository for this progress? How do we create an academic commons so so people can share their work? What kind of information goes in an academic commons? Is it just PDFs and Word documents? Do we have people share movies? Do we have people share whole websites? So these are massive questions at my tiny institution we're dealing with, but I think are very important. Because it's also about developing an effective saving culture.
We've started a system-wide core repository, so we have some of that set up a little bit as far as just that people decide what they want to put in the bucket.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's so this is how do you ask for volunteers or do you try to scour? Right? That's the challenge. Like, do you have the people to scour? Do you have to manage all that content? And if you're going through a voluntary phase, like, who knows what's falling through the cracks? They're really hard, difficult questions. So, but I think ones that are really worth having. Anyone else?
Can you explain a little more about like 3D printing? But it's interesting. Like, how would
People love 3D printing.
how are we going to introduce that and to properly regulate something like 3D printing? I assume as long as we have the materials, we can print whatever we want, right?
Right, so the way most of the 3D printers work right now, it's kind of like moving a hot glue gun automatically. I don't know if you, what it is this printer we have, the version before the one I showed you. It's essentially a plate, and then there's these two spools of plastic, and the plastic goes up and over into these two, there's two heaters, and they're heaters and spoolers, so the material goes into the top of the spooler and it pushes it down into the heater, and on the other side it comes out and it's like liquid, not liquid, but almost liquid. And then the heads move based on like these geometric patterns that are created. So you put a 3D model in and it figures out the patterns, and then it essentially stacks it. It lays down layer after layer after layer after layer until you get a 3D model. And so it's actually quite simple. It's pretty, like, if you figure out like the algorithms and whatever it takes to doing that, it's not super complicated. There's more complex ones where there's actually powder, and then they shoot resin into the powder, and then the powder solidifies, and you can actually make multicolored tools that way, but those are more expensive. But it raises questions like,
One day will we be able to print food almost?
there are chocolate printers. As long as you have a medium that's meltable and redoable, you can print chocolate. The really fascinating stuff is like, how do you move stuff to the moon? If you want to get like an entire space station up to the moon. Like, so what we've thought in the past is you fill up the space shuttle, you fly it up there, you land there, you take the stuff out, and you fly the space shuttle back, right? Well, what if you could make all of the structures on the moon out of moon dust?
Yeah, like out of something you don't have to move numbers.
So all you need is a printer. You fly the printer up there, you print 10 foot by 10 foot wall panels, and then you build your structures on the moon out of the stuff sitting on the ground. So this is the kind of, it's Star Trek. I mean, we're getting to the point where we're able to have these conversations about Star Trek. And it's also an interesting tool because it starts opening questions of intellectual property rights. It turns out people have been getting scans of jewelry online and then printing it out for themselves and then keeping it, but it turns out that those scans weren't open to the public, and so the jeweler isn't getting the money for their design. So it's a very interesting zone, and it's the first time we can talk about digital stuff and then like throw it at each other. You know? It's really the physical and the material. So.
Like bending walls kind of thing. It's a new concept.
Yeah, or bending spoons if you want to use a matrix and metallic. The spoon isn't there.
Yeah, most of us here are music students, and I'm just trying to figure out like how this concept includes the music department.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm a little bit confused.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing about the fine arts is that, I mean, I'm a scenic designer, right? That's what my training. And so I was doing CAD in 1994. You know, like this is we're going on, how long? 20 years. And so it's not that new, you know. And that's the crazy thing about everyone saying the newness. It's like for some people it hasn't been new. People have been designing music electronically since before 1994, far before that. So it really is, it's kind of about spreading that mentality to departments where it hasn't happened before. And that's where the collaboration and interdisciplinarity helps a lot, is like working with electronic music composers and understanding how the philosophy and understand the methods that they use can be applied to historical study. You know, using the same kind of tools and understanding the same kind of, that some of them are the same interfaces even, you know, and being able to track those mappings to open up the conversation to wider communities. But I think in music, most music is kind of there already. You know, it's been there for a while. There was some program even when I was in college. It was like when people were writing music Like it was like a word processor, and that was a big breakthrough, you know. But no one ever made a big deal about that in the academy for some reason, because it wasn't good for the Chronicle of Higher Education. But it's been there for a long time. It's just about, it's like I said, about building a culture and making sure everyone is talking to each other and understanding the wider implications. And then it's also, the program it's about the critique too. So you can start understanding even more so like the context of where your tool comes from. You know, what's the history of it? Why is it different? Why is it special? How does it change the sound? How does it organize it and take out of the serendipitous kind of uniqueness of analog sound? You know, building a critique of what the digital medium does to that thing, those things.
Like, my question is this something where, like, if you have to be declared as a major in digital studies in order to go there and use the facility or resources, or can anybody just kind of go in there and say, I have an idea, I'd like to work on this, get help, or, you know what I mean?
I'm not fully in control of policy, but the conversations we've been having today and the idea is that no, that it's there for everyone. The idea is to open up the possibilities. If we can concretize those experiences in certificates and degree programs, then that shows that we've gotten to a place. But no, I mean, like those tools I showed you, you could use those to do anything. You know, and it's just about making sure that those things are available for everyone, and that they're available, that they're supported, and that you're given instruction.
My name is Sid Judah. I'm a music major here. I have two questions.
Mm-hmm.
One is, you're talking about the center, so I'm wondering if the center is going to be a physical building or will it be within this building?
It's not a physical building.
It's not.
It's in this building.
It's in this building.
Okay. And
Until we take over the campus.
And we can print them 3 days.
Dirt in the ground.
And my other question was in terms of music. I mean, right now, record labels are running very scared because basically a CD is a digital master, and people are reproducing those and copyright infringement.
Or they're just downloading the files, screw the
Right.
CD. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what I'm wondering, I mean, you're up in New York, you're up in CUNY, you know, Columbia Records is there, a whole bunch of, I mean, what has been the talk about what is the next step in the evolution of the music industry?
I mean, I don't know that, but the music industry is a great model. I mean, my own personal research is I study the political economy of culture, and looking at the kind of the institutional forces that kind of change the way we consume culture. And the model of the music industry and how it got completely obliterated the last decade is often held as a poster boy for digital reform. But outside of that, it's also, it starts telling how the digital medium is very different than preceding mediums, how it's changing the landscape of intellectual property rights and ownership. And so, like GarageBand, you can make a digital quality master with essentially a piece of software that comes free on your computer. You know, that has totally changed the landscape of what it means to make music. Before you needed a recording studio, you needed a label, you needed a distributor, you needed a deal. Those things still help, but there are more avenues of escape from this productive system. And that's the kind of thing, you know, that the digital program starts bringing critique. And being in front of computers and realizing what you can do relative to what you thought was this kind of high removed cultural experience that you had no control of, but it's actually kind of at your fingertips in a really unique way. Those are the kind of really fascinating things.
Right.
Well, it's almost 3 o'clock. Well, could you?
I'm going to keep going. Yeah.
One more question?
Or two can rant.
Hey there. I just had a question about I really like everything you're describing to us, and my question is this a regional thing that you're bringing to this region, this tri-count? Like, you know, are you doing this national, global? Because it's really interesting, and I think it's a great idea. Just how, I mean, I know you have like a website and stuff like that. I just want to know what your approach is as far as getting more people on board with this.
So I work at, like I said, at a small research institute in New York, and I work with faculty and students. So I'm more of an educator than anything else. And what I do is part of a larger trend in the academy right now. There's a lot of people who are trying to do these things at lots of different colleges globally. You know, everywhere in the world is trying to grapple with this and trying to set up the right systems. And there's a variety of different ways that people are doing that. And so what I've been here for this interview today is that the goal is to do that at Rutgers-Camen, is to build a center that really addresses all these questions, and that makes things opens up opportunities for you guys, for the faculty, for the staff, so that the barriers of entry, the threshold for understanding and working with this stuff are much lower.
But yeah, because you were saying about like alienating people that you know, aren't on board with this plan, and I just think that because it's such a tough subject to talk about, you know, getting the word out about this and getting people on board, you know, it's got to be challenging.
Yeah, yeah, and there's definitely very strong pockets of resistance too. So.
Speaking of pockets of resistance, here's a scenario. Here and elsewhere. Good morning, class. Everybody settle down. Let's put our laptops and cell phones away and take out our books.
And no one buys books anymore.
And so that's just an open-ended invitation to speak about the learning tools that we have in our classes and the learning curve that a lot of us are on in terms of how to use those and how to integrate technology with the traditional spaces that we've grown up in and replicate with our students.
Well, you know, the challenge with that is I don't think a lot of professors feel empowered or feel part of a culture where they can deal with the presence of those digital technologies in their classes very well. And we don't really train how to deal with that, you know, and as distractions is what I mean. And I think the response is often blunt force because of the challenge, right? It's really overwhelming, and you're trying to teach, and they are distracting. And the funny thing is, most professors go off and are on their computers and their phones immediately after they teach, right? So it's not like it's not like the students are in a totally different realm in this regard. So that's why I think this establishment of a culture is even more important, you know, and an awareness and a fluency of the device, so that you can know as a student why the teacher's pissed off at you, you know, because it is like, if you understand the principle of it as a distracting object and losing the focus, then that provides a context. That's kind of pie in the sky a little bit, of course, but you know, my mandate is, and this is a tough one I give to professors, like, it's also, if students are on their Facebook, you gotta teach better, you know, because sometimes it's the class of distraction. But I'm saddened when I have my class and no one buys the books anymore. And I try to, that's part of the digital, that's part of the history, you know? Like I have a library in my office and I love it. And when a student comes in and asks me for guidance, what do? I go like this and I look up at my shelves and I can look at my intellectual history in a way that's really hard to in a folder full of PDFs. So building that recognition, and this is all about understanding these things in context and as a culture is really important. So that they aren't distractions, they're part of an intellectual life. Yeah.
I was just going to say, my wife teaches high school 16, 17, 18-year-olds, and she does English and Shakespeare. And the kids come in with their smartphones, and she actually puts them to work on the smartphones.
Yes, that's another way to go about it.
The thing is, she does, and you should be surprised how much high school kids do not know how to use their smartphones. You know, they know how to text, they know how to get on Facebook, but actually using it for research and information, you'd be surprised. Yeah. And she'd be like, I'm teaching these kids how to get valuable information out of this. And that's a way to keep them engaged. You know, so
one great teaching philosophy is go where they are. You know, and I experimented with hacking Facebook as a teaching platform at one point, back in 2005 when it was still pretty new. And like, if the students are going to be there, and then you can teach them about where they are while you're teaching them other things. So there are challenges.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think it's a great idea. I think it'll be a great step in the right direction. A lot of the programs that you showed, I thought, you know, obviously they're expensive programs. Anybody serious about working with any of those programs, I mean, if you can find it for free, I'm sure they would. And I think that would bring a lot of students to work at the school on some serious stuff, you know, application building. You know, you had AutoCAD up there. Other things like with the music department, you know, Logic Pro and
Yep.
tools, that type of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
You know, those are like expensive programs. You know, that normal people, like a lot of us can't really afford.
Yeah.
And you have it right at school, you can come to school
And really the idea, the reason I started there and went around is like, you got to start there and to get to here, because it's hard to lay out money for Pro Tools for everyone, and that's a lot of money. But once you build a culture and it's there and there's an appetite for it, it's a lot easier for administrators to justify the purchases. And we want, we want to make those purchases if the things are going to be used. And having a place that motivates that use is really important. And also so that it goes back to that center of gravity. You know, like if the music department has this and this program has this and this, and there's no unity in that understanding, it doesn't feel like a digital mentality. But if we have that kind of mentality, then you can really justify companion software that's multi-use. And then once that multi-use software doesn't do what you need, you can move to the very specific stuff, and you can find that there's value in investing in it.
Michael?
I'm a music major, but I do work in the computer lab here, and I was just going to say I think it's great how much you promote like the literacy and the fluency, because like I know sometimes like we'll have to go on, like I work at the help desk in the computer lab, and like sometimes we'll have us go on classroom calls where like a professor can't get the projector working or something like that, and I know that a lot of times I'm helping out professors that they just never, maybe it's not their generation or something, they just never really grasped computers really well. And I know that a lot of times, I think what a lot of people would do is that they'll just go in there, they'll walk in, they'll hit the projector button, they'll get it on, and they'll just kind of be like, have a good day, and walk out. I know that I try to teach them what I'm doing and show them like this is how you can do it so that you don't have to call us all the time. And not because we're not bugged by it, just because I know that like me, like I don't like feeling like I'm like super dependent on everybody. I think people like to feel independent, like they can do things themselves, like they're autonomous. So like to go in there and help them teach, and then they can actually learn and do it themselves, then they don't feel so, like you were talking about creating a culture, like they don't feel like so left out, like it's so beyond them. Like because a lot of the stuff isn't that hard to just figure out how to turn on the projector. It's just no one tries to teach them. And
it seems a lot harder than it is. Yeah. Well, there's a famous saying, you know, to solve a starving man's hunger, the best way is not to give him fish, but to teach him how to fish.
Right. Exactly.
And that's the kind of mentality here. Is that, you know, if I teach you how to fish, I don't have to listen to your darn help desk call over and over again. You know, it's like there's also real selfish needs in there. So.
Okay. Kimon, thank you